Hi everybody, my name is Kirsten Lovett and welcome to Ostara, the Ostara Summit sponsored by Celestial Tree, and I wanted to thank Marissa Lovett very much for several things. One, offering this summit that's just going to be super exciting the whole week. And first off, let me do housekeeping before I go through thank yous and then I'll get started. Thank you everyone for being here. I may not respond to your comments, but I totally am looking forward to seeing them. If you have any or questions or just any kinds of things you'd like to write about what we're going to talk about today. And I will get back to you, I promise. Let me go ahead and thank Marissa. Good morning to everybody. Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. So Marissa is doing this wonderful summit, and we've got a whole week of wonderful presenters. We had Jessica yesterday, who did a fabulous job of talking about her earth tending practice. And all of us throughout the week are going to be kind of doing our thing with that kind of topic, which is super awesome, because it's such a big, enormous topic that it has so many different branches that we need to look at. So I wanted to thank Marissa, first off, because this particular article that I'm going to get to in a minute that is in my presentation came from some research that she did. So it was a woman named Carol Cusack, and I'll mention the article when I go through the presentation. So this whole project for me that I'm going to present to you today kind of started from that article that Marissa found. So I wanted to thank her for that. And also just to have this opportunity with all of you guys. So before we get started, one more housekeeping thing before I actually get centered to start this. I'm going to have a raffle for a free session for 30 minutes with me. For anyone who's interested, after the presentation and sometime this afternoon, hopefully right after I get done, as soon as I can log on, I'll put on a link to a free PDF of the presentation I'm going to give today. And anyone who signs up for the free PDF, and stay tuned after I'm done for that link, will be entered into the raffle for a free 30-minute session. So if you're, thank you so much. So if you're interested, please feel free to sign up. It's a free PDF. And, excuse me, throughout this I'm probably going to be lighting a little bit of either sage or Palo Santo. Hopefully I won't have as much trouble lighting as I did last time. Some of you might remember I was lighting these things quite a bit and they were a little stubborn, but this one's burning pretty well, so that's good. So, one moment. Okay, so let me get started, get a little centered here. I'm going to do my Jaguar song, and maybe that'll help myself, and maybe it'll help you guys too if you need a little bit of centering in this wild and crazy, strange time we're living in right now. Full of opportunity, of course, but a little bizarre. Now I'm going to rub my hands together and put on my heart and stomach. Sometimes, I'm sure a lot of you have your own practices where you call in some kind of rattle or sound, maybe an animal spirit or a power animal of some sort. It's good to kind of center into your body because it just helps. Okay. All right. So just a little bit off the bat here, just on the top of this, and then I'll jump right into this because I've got quite a bit to cover. Just so you know the basic outline of what I'm going to talk about, and I'll try to take my time a little bit because I can tell I'm rushing a little bit already. Basically what I'm going to do, the arc of this is going to be, you're going to hear a little bit about, I'm going to talk a little bit about what I do, but then I'm going to tell you a little bit about some personal experiences with offerings and various things like that. Then we're going to get into the historical part. Now, if you're like me, you might be a little bit triggered by the historical stuff because you just might. I don't know. Everyone's different. I'm just warning you, don't worry. Once we get through it, and I'll come back at the end and talk more about like current stuff, modern day practices, and so I won't be ending on a note of the historical stuff. So we'll come back to modern times and the present, and hopefully you'll feel empowered at the end. So don't worry. So basically, I just wanted to tell you today, of course, I said my name already, Kirsten Lovett, and I'm sorry I have to look at my script some, but bear with me. I'll try and keep looking up so you guys know I'm with you. So I love to work with people to re-engage with spirits of nature and cultivate a relationship with the land through animistic principles. Just in case you didn't know, I got started in animism in 2007. I was initiated into the Andean Pampa Misayoc tradition in 2011, and have been moderating a free Facebook group, as you guys know, called Animistic Earth Medicine with Marissa Lovett. We've been here since September of 2017. I was lucky to be initiated into a sacred tobacco ceremony in 2012, and Marissa Lovett and I have a Patreon page, www.patreon.com/shamanic earth medicine, where we teach animistic principles, sacred tobacco, shamanic journeying. Marissa does that a lot, and as well as a variety of other things. And I've also been helping people since 2015 with shamanic guidance about various animistic topics. Basically, what I try to do when I help people is encourage them to become more connected to the sacredness of nature by looking through a lens of multidimensional awareness of how all our ancestors once saw nature. For those who already have cultivated this awareness, then we try to maintain and grow the awareness because it's a daily practice. So I offer guidance for those interested in exploring also the plant-spirit relationship with sacred tobacco, and I'm also familiar with Wachuma, and in the case of Wachuma and Mapacho, which I also have some familiarity with, I don't really focus so much on the ingestion of it as much as the plant-spirit relationship, and so that's a whole nother subject in itself. But for today, before I get started, I want to talk to you why you might be afraid, possibly, to make offerings in the first place, and we're going to address one example of cultural trauma. So the three things I'm going to talk about today are: one, recognition of the trauma in cultures, in all cultures. In hopes of healing, it's important to acknowledge that cultural trauma has happened to all cultures, including Europe and the British Isles, at some point in time where an empire has killed people for practicing animistic beliefs. Number two, which I think 2 and 3 are the most important thing, the trauma of not being able to give offerings to the land in general in the past, and this is unknown by most people unless you're already an animist, can affect how a person and our society sees the world today. And 3, certain habits, as we talk about a lot in the group here, help the spiritual health of the land and our relationship to it. It is the trauma from not being able to give offerings in years past that might prevent one from engaging in this way with nature currently. But once we acknowledge the trauma we can try to take steps to interact with the spirits of nature in a gradual manner over time. So I'm going to get into a current example where something very recently that happened to me, and I'm going to try to relate that into what follows, which is more of a historical example. So while researching, sorry, let me just light this again. Plus it'll give all of you a time to maybe take a sip of tea or whatever it is, coffee, water. Lighting a little bit of sage here, and that'll help. All right. So while researching and writing about the desecration of the ancestor traditions in regards to the felling of the Irminsul tree, and I'll talk about what that means later, so, and Donar's oak, which is, I'll mention that later too. I was bothered by something in my environment here. Some people who live behind us were hacking apart the bamboo trees that I enjoy outside my window. Now, I should clarify that these trees are more than just aesthetically pleasing. I send prayers to them as well and consider them ancestral guardians of my personal and family living space, and of course the surrounding land as well. So since the research I was doing and I was reading the research, was fresh on my mind, my emotions were much more raw in re-experiencing the ancestral trauma of the historical felling of the sacred trees that happened some 1,300 years ago. The more the man sawed outside my window, the more sad and angry I became. So, in addition to the trees in my backyard in Florida here, I found out a few weeks later that the great yew tree of, and I'm going to say this wrong, Llandegley, it's Llandegley, it's in South Wales, and this tree was 1,500 years old, recently met the attention of an overzealous tree surgeon. And it wasn't destroyed, but it was pretty much hacked apart a lot. If you want to see it, it's on, and I have this link in my PDF. Will Walking, his name is Will Parsons, and he does a lot of pilgrimage stuff in Britain, and he's on Twitter, and also I put a link to a petition in the PDF about saving the ancient yew trees. So I think on some level here in Florida, my ancestral remembrance was also picking up on this horrible, senseless act. And maybe if all society would look at the world animistically, where everything has a soul and spirit, maybe we wouldn't destroy people or traditions or ways of seeing and relating to the world. So while I don't have a solution to the problem as of yet, I do know that certain habits help the spiritual health of the land. This is why the practice of offerings is so important. It is the trauma from not being able to give offerings in years past that might prevent one from engaging in this way in nature. But once we acknowledge the trauma, we can try to take steps to interact with the spirits of nature in a gradual manner. It has to be very gradual because, as anyone knows who's been through any kind of change in behavior, or even if you're trying to lose weight or whatever it is you're trying to do, you have to do it gradually over time. So this is just one possibility, but I think it's better to try, even if a little at a time and gradually. So I realized that because trees have neural networks underground, the offerings I continue to make could have traveled to the trees in my backyards as well. This process created my bonding to the land where I live. Now, I may not be practicing traditions from this land in Florida here because I didn't grow up with those traditions from its historical perspective, but the regular actions taken to engage with the land spirits creates a strong bond. While the downside is when the land hurts, I hurt as well. But the upside, I have to believe, is this relationship will also help me to help the land. And I include, when I say land, I'm talking also about water and air, and I kind of use land in a general sense. Nature, I should say. Therefore, this method can be applied to all, I think, in their own environments, no matter where you live, or if you're from the land. If you grew up, there's always a certain amount of people who were very blessed who grew up with indigenous traditions, and I'll mention this later. Um, and if they're, they know how to, practice their traditions, that's great. But if you didn't grow up on the land you live on and you're, wanting to still engage with the land you live on, it's still possible. And I believe it can be applied to all environments, and not just with trees, but anywhere in nature, water, variety of places. If you live in the hills, if you live, in a valley, if you live near a forest, if you live, near a river, a lake, any number of places. So you might have to modify according to where you live. Some areas are more urban, like if you're in New York City or if you're in a big, urban place, obviously. And actually, before I keep reading about this, Jessica brought up an excellent point, and I wanted to, for urban people who are like literally in the city, she mentioned cracks in the pavement, and to see where nature grows in between those cracks. And it made me think, oh, that's a place I hadn't thought of, because it's been a while since I've been to New York City, and I forgot, as I remembered, when you're walking down the sidewalks, I'm sure there are some trees, obviously, in Central Park, but it might be a few blocks before you see an actual tree or a body of water or anything. All you have is the sky and a bunch of buildings. And so maybe if you look for, cracks in the pavement where, plants or weeds or whatever are growing, that's great for people in big cities. So yes, so you might have to do something like, when you do this, whatever your environment is, ask the nature spirits permission, whatever that may be in this case. If they respond, blow a prayer to the sky and to the earth. The breath is very important. And there's other methods, but this is just a very basic start, just to get you started. Then, if you want to add to that kind of relationship, you might want to find out about your local area in terms of sacred places, which sacred places are all over the earth, no matter where you live. If you were lucky enough to learn from an indigenous person or indigenous group of people from the land you currently live on, great. That's wonderful. If you can reach out to them with respect and humility and, reciprocity, if they are available. Otherwise, one can respectfully and humbly reach out to the spirits of the land where they live on, or water and such. And in an honest way, that's with an open heart, to establish a relationship with the land and water they live on by giving offerings. And it is the regular attempts to make offerings to nature that sustains the relationship. So the process can start in this way, for example. And this is just an everyday example. My sister and I have both visited, separately and together, various sacred mounds and mound sites, I should say, in our local area here in Florida, where we have animistically connected with the land. We've also done some reading about where we live, and there's still a lot to uncover, obviously, but it's a start. And in an everyday sense, when I'm out driving on a busy road that unfortunately happens to cut through a mound, it's even called Mound Street, I blow a prayer while I'm driving, so like that. Now, my sister taught me that this practice, as well as the practice of offerings, and in our busy everyday lives, I think all of us can find time to do something like this. Of course, you want to take caution while you're driving, keep your eye on the road, and your hands on the wheel, as the song goes. But I think it's, if it's a route you take all the time, where you know it like the back of your hand, maybe find a special place on your driving trip, that you take all the time, and just incorporate a little bit of breath into it. So ideally, you'll want to take walks or be out in nature to give offerings. But this is just a way to get started. You know, if you're just having trouble with putting aside the time or the effort or the energy, or it's just not feasible at this time. So now's the part where we're going to talk about the history. And I'm going to light one more sage. Thank you for sticking with me here. Get that going. So before we get started talking about the historical trauma, there's a few things to consider. When people talk about colonization, I think they forget to talk about the fact that it didn't just start in 1500 AD. The destruction of a culture's spiritual practices where entire groups of people are tortured, killed for practicing in nature didn't just happen in a vacuum or to only one group of people. People inside of the colonizer group probably also have ancestors who were colonized in other countries and had that done to them as well. I do not condone the destructive actions of the colonizers, both past and present. However, I wish we could all look at Europe and the British Isles as a place that was always earth-honoring, in some cases up until a few hundred years ago. If you want to see, just off the top of my head, you can look at Alexander Carmichael's book, Carmina Gadelica, and that's just one example. There's several other referrals and references in the PDF if you're interested in that. So even after Christianity arrived in Europe, many British Isles and European cultures fought and died to keep their ancestral earth-honoring cultures alive for hundreds of years. So what is an earth-honoring way of being? And this is where I'm going to be referring to Carol Cusack's article, and the article is called Pagan Saxon Resistance to Charlemagne's Mission, Indigenous Religion and World Religion in the Early Middle Ages, and it's from the Pomegranate International Journal of Pagan Studies. And this was done in 2012, so it's fairly recent. So a lot of these quotes are hers, so I'll tell you when I'm saying something. So she says, indigenous religions are local, earthbound, and this-worldly. Compelling evidence can be assembled to support the contention that indigenous cultures recognize no division between the secular and the sacred. I always love finding academics who match things that I believe. And that's one of my favorite sentences I've read. These indigenous religions were referred to in earlier scholarship as primitive, primal, and archaic, terms that are now rejected as prejudiced and inadequate. They are also sometimes described as ethnic or kinship-based religions. I kind of like kinship-based, and because that implies kind of like what we hear, all my relations, and you know, it's kind of cross-cultural. It's very much cross-cultural. Now, in contrast to that, she says the ideal type world religions are characterized by written scriptures, systematic theology, proselytization, otherworldliness, elite orientation, exclusivism, like exclusivity, and universalism, and are linked to expansionist economies, which we're all well aware of that in the present day, and global understandings of warfare. So Carol Cusack talks about how, contrary to many historical representations of pagans in pre- and post-medieval Europe, quote, the majority of analyses of these encounters in the disciplines of history and medieval studies are uncritically pro-Christian and assume that the conversion of pagans and their inclusion within the Christian world undoubtedly represented progress, unquote. As an example, Cusack talks about the destruction of the Irminsul, and you're going to hear me talk about that. And some of you may already know that this is a Saxon monument. It was a Saxon monument at Eresburg near Paderborn by the army of the Frankish king Charlemagne in 772. And she says, there is thus some evidence that trees were part of Germanic pagan religion, which included both the Hessians and the Saxons, making it probable that a Christian missionary would find it appropriate to destroy a sacred tree. This is congruent with the characterization of this religion as indigenous, place-based, and local. But to understand the absolute severity of tearing down a sacred tree, let's look at what the axis mundi, and I know you guys have heard that before, or world tree motif might mean to many cultures. Excuse me. Sorry to break for a moment. I have to, we're talking about the axis mundi in just a moment here. Station identification. Okay, that's as good as that gets. Okay, so what does the axis mundi or world tree motif mean to many cultures? So the 9th century Benedictine monk Rudolf of Fulda's reference to the Irminsul as a universal column upholding the world is also familiar to the religious studies scholar. The axis mundi is a motif found in many cultures, both in mythological and ritual contexts. The Norse tree, Yggdrasil, I know some of you have heard of that, supporting the 9 worlds, is one example. The pillar and altar ritual spaces of the Vedic Indians another. This motif does not, however, seem restricted to the Indo-European peoples. Finno-Ugrian and Altaic cultures employ it as well. And then I also added that, of course, the Mayans also have a deep belief in the world tree, too. So back to the Irminsul. When St. Boniface, and I'm also going to refer to a place called the Donars Oak. So when St. Boniface cut down the Donars Oak, or when Charlemagne cut down the Irminsul, this heralded the collapse of the indigenous Germanic traditional worldview. And we go back to Carol Cusack saying, Charlemagne willfully pursued a policy of military subjugation of the Saxons and Frisians. The felling of the Irminsul shows him striking at the heart of Saxony by desecrating an important ritual center. The simplest form of early medieval Germanic conversion to Christianity took place in centralized regions where a king who had been approached by missionaries could decide, after consultation with his council, to peacefully bring about the transition, a model which is normally called top-down conversion. Saxony and Frisia lacked centralized monarchies, which meant that it was not possible that an individual or a small clique could decide on the part of all the people. See, I think that's kind of an advantage. But this fact also meant that resistance to conversion would be manifested across the population, although certain people did become prominent leaders. Charlemagne followed up his ritual destruction of their world by concentrated and intentional actual destruction of that world. The tale recorded in the Royal Frankish Annals, which were compiled between 787 and 793 AD, and later revised, possibly by one of Charlemagne's intimates, makes very grim reading. And luckily I'm not going to read that right now. But Carol Cusack tells about the desecration. In 772, the most gracious Lord King Charles then held an assembly at, and I think I'm pronouncing this right, Worms. It looks like worms, but it's German, so that's usually pronounced V, Worms. From Worms, he marched first into Saxony. Capturing the castle of Eresburg, he proceeded as far as the Irminsul, destroyed this idol, and carried away the gold and silver, which he found. A great drought occurred, so that there was no water in the place where the Irminsul stood. The glorious king wished to remain there 2 or 3 days in order to destroy the temple completely, but they had no water. Suddenly at noon, through the grace of God, while the army rested and nobody knew what was happening, so much water poured forth in a stream that the whole army had enough. So, when analyzing these two descriptions, certain classic religious studies motifs should be noted. The description of Willibald connects tree veneration with the Roman deity Jupiter, long associated through comparative Indo-European studies with the Greek Zeus, the Vedic, and forgive me, I'm probably going to pronounce this wrong, Vedic Dios Pitar. Some of you can correct my pronunciation. Dyaus Pitar. And the Germanic sky and thunder deity Donar, hence Donar's oak. Donar, Thunor, and Thor. The connection between this deity and trees is attested from Tacitus in the 1st century onward. And Hilda Ellis Davidson notes that, quote, it seems that Donar, Thor's, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong too, forgive me, Thor's predecessor, like the Greek Zeus, was associated with the great oaks of the forest, which covered much of Western Europe, which up until a couple of months ago, I didn't know that Thor was associated with oaks so much. And so now I try to associate him with that as well. Evidence from Greek mythology suggests that the shrine of Zeus at Dodona was an oak sanctuary where priests interpreted the rustling of the wind in the trees. And that's fascinating for a lot of you who are interested in wind, divination, and the relationship with wind. So even though we're talking about Saxony, in this research, she's gone as far south as Greece. So that's pretty fascinating. So the Royal Frankish Annals and the Annales Loricinus Minoris, this is the 7th to 9th centuries, composed at the Abbey of Lorsch, among other texts, reveal the extent of Charlemagne's earnestness in the destruction of the remaining independent, traditional, indigenous, pagan, Germanic communities. Since identity is nurtured by and within the community, where non-literate people, I think she means literally people who are living by oral traditions, non-literate people pass on traditional learning. Charlemagne forcibly expelled Saxons from their lands and resettled them in remote parts of the Frankish Empire from 794 through 804 CE. Some sources claim that 1/3 of the Saxons were thus uprooted. Adding to this terrible casualties of the war, Saxony was radically depopulated. The Saxon Capitularies, legislation published in 785 and 797, prescribed severe penalties for continued pagan religious observance. If anyone among the race of the Saxons hereafter concealed among them shall have wished to hide himself unbaptized, and shall have scorned to come to baptism, and shall have wished to remain a pagan, let him be punished by death. That's an actual quote. So with regard to the Irminsul, North analyzes the centrality of the world-supporting cosmic, in this case it's an ash tree, Yggdrasil, in Scandinavian mythology and its association with judgment and fate. Tully connects to this syncretic gesture by the Christian King Oswald of Northumbria, and I believe that's England, Northumbria. Some of you Shakespeare buffs probably remember Northumbria. What is that, from Hamlet or Macbeth? It's one of those. I think is it Macbeth? One of you guys will know, Northumbria. In erecting a cross before his battle against the British King Cadwalla at Hexham in 634 CE. The site at which this took place, which was called Heffenfelth, and you can hear in that Heffenfelth is Heavenfeld, a name which Bede notes is ancient, that is, pre-Christian or pagan. Tully concentrates his attention on a passage in Widekind's Res Gestae Saxonae, that's just Latin stuff, which describes the erection of an ad hoc Irminsul after a significant victory. The Irminsul sustained the Saxon universe, but as Eliade has observed, some of you know who Eliade is, it need not be the only center. So Karras suggested there may have been others, noting the place name similar to the Irminsul, Ermenseul, in Lower Saxony, near Hildesheim. And I thought this was fascinating. Other world-supporting or territory-defining trees are known from Finnish, Suomi, Lappish, Sami, and Altaic cultures, and from medieval Irish texts also. For example, the yew of Ross, and I'm going to pronounce this wrong, the ash tree of Usnich. Trees therefore signified the upholding of the cosmos in the Germanic world, and were foci for pagan ritual centers, where legal and religious upholding also, and I would say ritual as well, also took place. And to fell such a world support is semiotically identical to destroying the sacralized identity resting in it. So even, she continues, even in peaceful conversions to Christianity, the indigenous pagans were deprived of their traditional way of life and religion. In the case of the violent conquest and conversion of the Saxons, their culture underwent a seismic shift when it encountered the Christian world religion. We're talking about the Saxons now, their indigenous worldview became unviable as their microcosm clashed with the Christian macrocosm, the early medieval equivalent of a global culture and a world religion. The Christians stripped the Saxons of both their paganism and the land that nurtured their traditional worldview. For a historian to examine texts and discover only Christianity and to deny the very existence of paganism can only be regarded as a significant moral lapse. To uncritically view conversion to Christianity as a positive and to fail even to mention the wanton destruction of pagan culture and religion is to applaud and ratify the results of colonialist expansion and globalization, while ignoring the cynical and brutal means through which that end was reached. And of course, when I talk about Christianity, just as a caveat emptor here, I'm not talking about the love your brother as yourself, aspect of Christianity. I'm talking about the empire and the colonialist aspect of Christianity. Or any other empire. In a modern context, I have seen, this is me talking, seen and felt some internal resistance. And now we're entering, don't worry, we got through, FYI, we got through the historical part. So yay! Yay! So, you did it. Okay, so in a modern context, back here in the present day, 2020, it is 2020, isn't it? Sometimes when we go traveling in time, I forget what time it is. In a modern context, I have seen and felt, just in my own personal experience, some internal resistance during my own offering practices. But mostly due to continued daily or every other day habits, even if you can't do it every day, just as much as you can, of leaving offerings at trees or on behalf of trees or water spirits or any other nature beings or places. I have been able to have more positive than negative experiences. So here's one example of a positive experience with offerings. And this is at a tree. So on an occasion of leaving offerings at a designated tree, and in this case it's for a group of Nordic ancestors, I saw an eye patch, and of course this was in my third eye. It was in a vision on a fence behind the tree. So this eye patch vision was seen, like I said, through my third eye, which doesn't happen very often, or it didn't at the time. So I saw this as a really, really good sign of Odin, since this is where the tree where I leave offerings for Odin and Freyja, and also a healed Nordic ancestor. So perhaps seeing the patch, which made me think of Odin, might mean that because of regular offerings left at that spot for Odin and Freyja and the healed Nordic ancestor, that process established a communication link, or even what the Andeans call a seke. Because we know Odin is a traveler, it's no surprise he might show up in Florida. But I also think this kind of energetic resonance happens between spiritually compatible energies and helping spirits from different cultures, which that was really kind of eye-opening moment to feel that and experiencing that. And it's kind of an ongoing thing that I'm trying to figure out. I've seen it happen when humans practice something like offerings in nature or other animistic practices. Doesn't always have to be offerings, although offerings are pretty cross-cultural. It becomes a very real, everyday process and experience in the here and now, right now, currently, as we're living modernly. And it connects you with what all of our ancestors once did at any point in time worldwide. The process and practice, provided you leave offerings by asking permission, that's a key part. Of course, you know, some of the, for any of you, I'm going to put a pin in where I am here. For any of you who are interested in diving deep, please listen to Jessica's talk yesterday, because she gets into the nuts and bolts of observation and the sensory experiences of earth tending practices. And I'm sure we're going to have a lot of really wonderful, I know Marissa's going to get into that as well. And I'm looking forward to everyone else's too. So this process and practice, provided you leave offerings by asking permission, of course, of the nature spirit, helps you connect respectfully in an honest way with the spirits of the land you live on. If you're a person like me, and I think there's a lot of people like this, whose family and ancestry are not, you're living on a land that's not, you know, that's different from where you came from. You're a settler, so to speak. But you're still, you can be a settler, I'm a settler too, but I'm forging a bond with the land. That's what I talk about when I say bonds with the land. And it's especially helpful for people who would like to connect with indigenous people from the land they live on, but maybe the local indigenous people are busy fighting off the newest version of the Roman Empire, the corporate empire. Sorry to put my politics in here, but, you know, it's pretty hard to ignore at this point in time. And that's not politics, actually. It's just reality. So if you are lucky enough to have the opportunity to study or learn from a trusted person who hails from the native people of the land you live on, and there are cases where you can do that, then please do so with humility and respect for their time, because a lot of times, like when I think of, I'm just going to go off book here for a minute, like Betty Osceola is a local to our state on Facebook. I've never met her personally, but she does a lot of really great work with the Miccosukee, but she's very busy. She's trying to take care of her community, but she does a lot. So I mean, she's a wonderful source for people in Florida. But you know, sometimes you get lucky, and there might be somebody in your area who, you know, maybe is, like we all know, sometimes we share Wally's videos, Wally Brown from the Navajo traditional medicine on Facebook, and he does some wonderful videos about their traditional, and of course, that's just North America. I mean, you know, depending on where you live, it's going to vary in those situations. Of course, that is, of course, if you are not of indigenous, you know, heritage yourself and living and practicing animistic practices already. So then you wouldn't need that. But for many people, this is not possible because a lot of indigenous people are really overloaded right now with their own issues that are, everyone's, sorry to blurb about this, but there's a lot of people like myself and my sister and all of you online here who are trying to serve in Seva and in whatever way we can at this moment in time to help stop pipelines, stop colonialist expansion. And sometimes, you know, learning things like traditional wisdom from these people, it's a hard thing to do because they're pretty overloaded with what they need to do to keep the corporate empire off their land. So on behalf of all of us, and I thank them, of course. So for me here in Florida, you know, and I know I'm lucky because Marissa and my whole family does this. We try to honor the land we live on as best we can. So if you connect with the land and the spirits of the land with humility and open heart, and and respect for the traditions that came before you on the land. And if you have time, learn about the history of the land if you can, and the people who lived here, of course. That's a big part of it, of course, if you can do that. And a respect for the traditions from one's own genetic earth honoring, like I talked about today. So I just chose this example because it matched up with some of experiences I've had with some helping spirits, and it was kind of a joint project mission with several other things that came together at the same time, but essentially it was just one example. So you could pick something that you feel personally connected with in your own genetic earth honoring ancestral traditions, whatever that genetic earth honoring ancestral tradition may be. That's a tongue twister there. And they might be unknown to you, but that's going to be a process as well. So wonderful possibilities can happen when you just start an offering practice. If you're into shamanic journeying, you might ask what kinds of offerings the land prefers when you're in that, maybe set that intention before you do a shamanic journeying. And without knowing the details, I'm sure Marissa will get into that as well. I tend to ask, personally, sacred tobacco, the sacred tobacco spirit, and sometimes I offer occasional types of food and tea, which I'm lucky my family makes every day, as they have taught me in practicing this type of offering. The food or liquid, which will vary, of course, depending where you live, what what the local area is like, but it can be lovingly sprinkled upon the earth, and it helps if anytime you're doing these kinds of practices, if your heart is open, just really be as sincere as you possibly can, even if it's new to you, because when you're numb, as I was, it's hard to just start doing this off the bat, and so it takes a little bit of time. So if you're taking short walks in nature, it's possible to incorporate offerings into your walk. The earlier example about seeing the Odin eye patch is an example of one possibility, and it may take some time, but the possibilities of an occurrence such as this means that there is hope in healing the trauma of losing our cultural traditions. Perhaps we can reestablish them and learn a new way of animistically, a new way that also brings in some of the old too. And by leaving offerings, we are doing so in the now, in the present, as well as for the future. So in closing, and thank you for sticking with me, let's revive what all our ancestors used to do worldwide, or all of our healed ancestors used to do worldwide at some point in time. To love, to care for, and maintain a sacred relationship with the earth, water, fire, and all of nature. As it develops, the caring relationship then leads to an ancestral remembrance of acting on behalf of the spirits of nature in relationship. So thank you for joining me on this short journey and sticking with me through the presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope to see you at my Patreon page with Marissa Lovett. It's www.patreon.com/shamanic earth medicine. And Marissa and I both post videos there. And it's only $1 a month. And if you sign up for the PDF, also on the PDF, if you sign up for it, you'll see all of my different social media channels there. I have a YouTube channel, Instagram, I'm on Facebook as well, and Twitter and Pinterest. And I just wanted, I'm going to close this out with my Jaguar song, because the guys told me I needed to do it at the end too, because I keep forgetting. But I just wanted to thank you, and also say that if you sign up for the free PDF, which I'm going to put in the comments after I log off of here, it might take me a couple minutes to do that. So give me maybe like 15 minutes, because sometimes it takes a few minutes to get that stuff together. I'm going to put a link to the PDF. It'll say the title of is the free gift. And if you sign up for that, you'll be entered into a raffle for a free 30-minute session with me. And thank you so much. This was a tough topic, and I appreciate you guys sticking with me. And please stay healthy. One last note. This is my dark sense of humor coming in, but I think had I known that we would be facing a pandemic, I probably wouldn't have done this topic today. But I didn't know that 4 months ago, and that's when I started working on it. And by the time we knew what was happening, you know, as all of you know, I was just like, you know what, I just need to get this done. So it wasn't on purpose that I scheduled this on a day when worldwide we're experiencing very difficult times. But you know, I hope it ends with some hope and this presentation, and that I hope it finds all of you, you know, feeling well and new beginnings and happiness and joy and love. And to end us out here, I'm going to do one last Jaguar song. Thank you again, and please tune in. I think later today is, I want to say 4 o'clock or 6 o'clock. I think it's 6 o'clock. Is, I believe, Susie Zern, but we'll post again. I'll be posting another. Marissa's already got posts out so that you know who's coming up next. Thank you. Blessings to all of you. Thank you so much.